Without further ado, Matt Ehret, I'm so delighted that Matt has agreed at short notice also to contribute. He's what's the word, hell of a busy guy. He sends me his emails. By the way, Matt, you're always welcome to post them on our bigger WhatsApp group. Some of the people there are quite distinguished and, they're involved in the media or universities or activists. So feel free, you don't need my permission because that's the idea of the WhatsApp group. I'm not going to do justice to Matt or anyone here about introduction. Matt, feel free to say what you want to say about yourself, and you have up to 30 minutes to speak. And just to introduce this topic, Matt, on after further discussion and our own research, is going to talk about, this will interest you too, Ahmed, from the Parliament. His topic is to understand this monster. It is a monster, yeah, Zionism. On the roots of Zionism in terms of the theological roots of Christian Zionism, because most Zionists are actually Christian. You know, in America, for instance, Christian Zionism, its roots, and then technocracy, transhumanism, and the new Gnostics, yeah? So please introduce what you want to say about yourself. You're most welcome, because I wouldn't be able to do justice. And over to you, Matt. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Moeen, and for all of the other distinguished guests and speakers. Thank you for this opportunity to share a few remarks, a few thoughts. And yeah, the title that we ended up settling with was something to the effect of transhumanism and millenarian Christian Zionism, two sides of the same heresy. And the reason why, after a little bit of discussion, and forgive my pace if I'm a little bit slow or off, it's because it's very, very late or early. At this hour, it kind of everything gets a little bit blurry. So I do apologize, but I'll do my best to use that 30 minutes well. We had discussed originally hammering at the question of the Christian Zionist and technocracy angle, which is what I will be doing indirectly in some ways, but I chose to focus on transhumanism as a particularly virulent, I would say, Gnostic religion. And it is a religion, though it tries to profess a type of scientific atheism, but it has a core religious fervor and set of core assumptions about the cosmos, the creator, the creation, the purpose of humanity, and more broadly. So that there are fundamental assumptions that are founded in blind faith, around which facts, data are reorganized and spun to justify outcomes that are themselves completely morally unjustifiable and actually unreasonably so. And one of the points, technocracy, if you think about it, it just means rule by a technical class that may be good, it may be bad, whereas transhumanism, the way I think about it, is always bad no matter what. I can't even think of any scenario where transhumanism could be a good thing, because it comes with a very sick and evil view of human nature, which is something to be ultimately judged to be evil, wrong, to be transcended by a higher class, a higher caste of self-professed architects or human gods that feel that they have the authorization to steer humankind into a new phase of evolution, transhumanism, right? And whether that takes the flavor, there's many flavors. Eugenics was an earlier incarnation of the same sick idea. Social Darwinism was another expression of it, both of which came out of a network in the Royal Society in the 19th century, run by a figure named Thomas Huxley, who ran an organization called the X Club, Thomas Huxley being one of the handlers of Charles Darwin, and this X Club trying to essentially accumulate some of the leading British empirical scientists representing various fields of science, geology, mathematics, chemistry, physics, and even anthropology, into a new controlled language. And that language would be premised around certain concepts of the inevitability of effectively the inevitability of a future state that would result in the cancellation of all of the human values, norms that had governed the Abrahamic faiths for centuries and millennia. That would be canceled by virtue of this inevitable scientific managed society and eugenics, as I mentioned, of Galton, Herbert Spencer, who were both members of the X Club, who generated social Darwinism, were both different flavors of the same outcome. And I would say transhumanism after World War II was the name given to the rebranded thing by specifically figures who will play into my presentation today. I'm thinking specifically of the figure of Sir Julian Huxley, the grandson of Thomas Huxley, who went on to coin the term transhumanism in 1954, as he was also the vice president of the British Eugenics Society at the same time. That's not two separate things. He also was the founder of UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, for those who don't know. And in his founding document of UNESCO, its purpose and philosophy, people can read it online. He literally explicitly states that eugenics is still the most important of all sciences. And he's saying this in 1946. But because Hitler has made it unpalatable for the masses, we need to give the unthinkable a new name to make it once again become thinkable. And he was doing this at a time when, again, he was still steering the eugenics department of the British Eugenics Society. He was the head, the founder, the father of modern conservationism, as he founded the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. In that very same year, he went on to also co-found with Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip Mountbatten in 1961 the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, and he actually was the lead architect of the Morgues Manifesto that was designed to replace the notion that human beings were somehow intrinsically sacred and valuable, and instead replace it with the notion that Earth ecosystems had to be protected from nature, from human activity. Not that humans had to be protected from empires, but rather nature had to be protected from humans, was the new ethos that he and those who he represented wished to bring into being. And I see all of this is connected to his coining of the term transhumanism, which he also did with a colleague that he was very close to for many, many years, whose name was Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a leading Jesuit representative of the Catholic faith, of Christianity. He actually saw himself as a new Moses who would rewrite the Gospels. That's Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit. And together they co-produced the term transhumanism, one representing so-called Christianity, the other one representing atheistic science. And you would think that these two men would have everything in opposition to each other, and yet they got along so well in agreeing upon certain ideas of what humanity should become. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, of course, is the founder also of a book called Omega Point. He was also a eugenicist. He's on record calling for the need to scientifically manage society according to Christian principles, in his words, whatever that means, because he literally calls for bringing in eugenics as the governing mechanism of what decides who will be fit to survive and who will not be permitted to procreate in the new world he wants to bring about, which was not dissimilar from his work on the Omega Point. So what is the Omega Point? Well, this is something which profoundly influenced the Silicon Valley transhumanists and technocrats that people might have noticed have risen in vast influence from being simply on the sidelines in the tech sector as billionaires, which they were 10 years ago, all of a sudden now becoming leading figures shaping global policy. Peter Thiel, Ray Kurzweil, Larry Ellison, Elon Musk are just some of the notable names I'm thinking about, all of whom believe in the inevitability of a future singularity point, whether it's 2045, 2050, there's some dispute, but the idea is that beyond the particulars of the date, they all agree that there's a consensus that there is a singularity pulling us teleologically into this future moment, this bifurcation point, which is profoundly rooted. It has its precedence entirely in Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's formulation of the Omega Point that he outlined in that book, in the Phenomena of Man, with a foreword by Julian Huxley, that book from the 60s or 50s. So this direct connection to Silicon Valley transhumanists who are shaping increasingly military policy. We see that Palantir has taken a very big lead in shaping the application of military and surveillance systems, both inside of the USA, across Europe, as well as more broadly. New drone and other AI tech that's being used to govern and manage the chaos of human society that's being brought in by this crowd. And you would think that they would also have very little to do with Christian fundamentalist types like the Christian Zionist faction around people like, let's say, Pete Hegseth, right? But yet they all seem to get along very well, just as 60, 70 years ago, Julian Huxley and Chardin's Jesuits were also getting along very well. And you're wondering, well, why? Well, I'd say that there are certain common features. Pete Hegseth, for example, the defense secretary, has written a book calling for American Crusade. Moeen, we hear you pretty much. If you guys are going to talk, you have to put the mute on.
Sorry, one second. Let me put the mute on because someone is having technical problems. Let me see. Sorry about that.
Don't worry about it, Moeen.
Yeah.
So what did Pete Hegseth do? He wrote a book called American Crusade, calling for the need to reorganize the American identity around a new crusader ethos to revitalize and rejuvenate the placid spirit of patriotism around a notion of a Templar identity of fighting monsters to destroy abroad that are deemed heretical, whether it is, in the case of Hegseth, communist Chinese, that he says should be the organizing principle, the need to destroy communist China for the 21st century and beyond, or Islamic fundamentalism, or Islamicism in general. He's basically saying should be the organizing principle. He never talks about stopping the CIA's funding or exposing the CIA's funding of radical Islamist madrasas and other things. That's been going on since the days of Jimmy Carter and Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski. He doesn't talk about any of that, the CIA and US role in inflaming this perversity. He doesn't talk about that. Instead, he talks about the need to organize America around this inevitable war. Same thing for Steve Bannon, another major figure representing many of the so-called patriotic factions inside of the USA, is calling for a new crusade. Same principles. What else has Hegseth done? Well, he's given speeches, many speeches. You could see some of them online, calling for, in Israel, saying that his purpose in life is devoted to rebuilding Solomon's temple. If you see him, unfortunately, without a t-shirt on, which there's a number of pictures, you'll find that his choice in tattoos is questionable. And the fact that he decided to put, of all things, the Kingdom of Jerusalem flag, which was the Templar Crusader kingdom for 200 plus years in essentially Palestine, on his chest as a permanent tattoo, is, I believe, more of a testament, an article of his core faith of what he believes the world should become. So there are these teleological future moments that unfortunately accompany a belief that God requires a mass period of purgative bloodletting and violence that has to result in massive death, that grips the minds of both the transhumanist Silicon Valley type crowd as well as this virulent Christian Zionist thing. And where does the ideology that Pete Hegseth has embraced, where did it come from? Well, if you look at it, it came from the British Empire, and I know we're going to have other future presentations in today's panel and maybe future panels dealing with that fact, but it's important it can't be restated enough that going back to the 19th century, it was people like Lord Shaftesbury, Anthony Ashley Cooper, who was one of the earliest, loudest advocates of this reinterpretation that Judaism had to be redefined around a notion of getting the Jews of the world to go and live in that particularly geopolitically hot strategic region of the world, in that desert. The other thing as well is that Moeen, you really do have to hit mute at some point, Moeen, if you're going to talk. Sorry. But one of the other things is that this idea that Lord Shaftesbury was pushing around this evangelization of Zionism and even what becomes Christian Zionism is that he wasn't doing it by himself. He was using the works of networks around Henry Drummond of the New Apostolic Movement of the 1826 period that had their Aylesbury conferences, where what was rediscovered. The Archbishop of Canterbury rediscovered in the Vatican archives certain writings by a Jesuit that was a major controller of the Council of Trent. So what did you have? You had a Jesuit named Jose Rivera during the Council of Trent who reformulated a certain notion that eschatologically, in order to bring in to validate the Book of Revelation, that certain conditions had to be met, of which the rebuilding of Solomon's temple was one of those conditions. The bringing back of the Jews and the recreation of a state of Israel, a nation of the Jews, had to be one of those other conditions. And within that, a period of purgative violence that became the foundation, the backbone of what later becomes, under the Aylesbury conferences, the rediscovery of these Jesuit visions of the future and reinterpretations of the Bible, of the scripture. They become the foundation of what governs the Plymouth Brethren, people like Darby, John Nelson Darby, the founder of premillennial dispensationalism, and this interpretation as well of promoting the notion that rapture is somehow going to be a gift for all the good Christian Zionists who abided by his particular spin and interpretation of what is being said in the Bible. This guy himself is a direct devoted follower of the British Empire and the Empire's cause. You also have, again, Shaftesbury, you have Drummond, you have a number of these figures who are ironically also anti-Semitic as hell. They actually don't like the Jews, but they somehow believe that we have to start doing everything possible to actually reconstruct and do everything possible to create this homeland for the Jews. This becomes the backbone of Zionism and Christian Zionism at the same time. And the fact that you have, again, people who are working with the Nazis later on, like Lord Milner, co-authoring the Balfour Accords, the Lord Balfour himself. It's not just Walter Rothschild. You have these other characters, Lloyd George, the pro-Nazi prime minister, who becomes the guy who Hitler is saying, or he's telling Hitler, I'll be your Nazi prime minister if you take control of England. These are the guys co-authoring the Balfour Accords, who all actually just simply, they actually despise the Jews, and yet they're devoted to creating the Jewish homeland. And you're like, why? Is that a paradox? Seems like a paradox, but maybe it's not a paradox. Maybe this whole thing is actually being carried forth in order to actualize some form of very nasty eschatological interpretation that's premised on the idea of recreating the Templar kingdom of Jerusalem. And as Albert Pike himself, the Grand Master of the Scottish Rite Lodge of the 19th century and founder of the KKK, had even said in his important occult book, Morals and Dogma, in 1871, that the Templars were unsophisticated Jesuits. And he was correct. And you could prove that the Templars, even after they were disbanded, who had their home base in Solomon's stables under today's Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, that those Templars, as a Gnostic military stormtrooping movement to oversee the Crusades, even though they were disbanded, they were taken down for heresy and witchcraft, which it seems they were actually doing. They didn't disappear. Their assets, their control of global banking, trade, shipping lanes, all of those assets, they didn't lose control of that. They reemerged in different forms in the ensuing centuries. That's a whole conversation unto itself, but there is a direct line tying them to the emergence of the Jesuits and the Anglican Church. Which were both created, by the way, in 1534 in the same year by very similar religious engineers. Let's just say that. That's a big part of my book. So you have this Templar Jesuitical conviction. And what is another thing that the Templars wanted to do? Well, on top of creating a policy of general, forever purgative violence and war, they also had a future orientation of reconstructing Solomon's Temple in the same way that Julian the Apostate had promised and didn't quite follow through on in the 4th century in 362. So this is part of the doctrine. There's a certain idea, and when these Gnostic creatures think about Solomon's Temple, I got to say, it doesn't seem like they think about the same thing that people who read the Quran or the Bible or the Torah, they don't think about the same, or the Jewish Bible. They don't think of the same thing that's in the public religious text. They have a very different idea of a zone, which was a center of witchcraft, human sacrifice. That's what they think of when they think of Solomon's Temple. And they think about the idea of rebuilding the old ancient mystery religions as a new normalized function of human social organization that can only happen after a cataclysm. Now, the danger, I also believe that there is a future teleological destiny for the species, for humankind, that's made in the image of a living, loving God. I believe that. However, my belief, and I think those beliefs of those who are the most sane, useful people in history that I admire, do not necessitate a mass cataclysmic murder of most human beings to get to that healthy age. These guys don't agree with me. So they seem to think that there is always some necessity of mass genocide before the golden age can happen. So it's sick, but they're manifesting. It's kind of the Pygmalion effect in a sick way. You know, if you believe it and then you start making it happen, then you say, oh, I see, I said I was going to get an accident and then I got an accident. Well, you kind of made it happen as well. It's not necessarily that God made you get in an accident. You know, so you get that problem that both these, you know, radical different flavors, whether it's Jesuitical of an Anglican variety, whether it's a Protestant, whatever, Pentecostalic or whatever, as well as these radical, seemingly atheistic materialists, all seem to abide by certain common assumptions that see themselves as gods effectively because they are the ones who can all of a sudden judge the fate of all of humankind as if they were, and that they're above good and evil, that they can actually oversee things that result in the massive death of innocent people en masse in order to justify some idea of a greater good for them. So, look, that's my idea that these are two sides of the same heresy. And I know I've taken up a lot of time. I'll close out my remarks there.